This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the recording of the PLA Roundup, a webinar from North Virginia librarians as they report on their session and general experiences at PLA. Unfortunately, during the original recording, we had some difficulty with bandwidth. And so as we move forward, I will indicate where the recording is being spliced and note that you might miss a very brief piece of information. Thank you for joining us, and I think you'll really enjoy what our presenters have to say. Your awesome presenters include Catherine Field, an Adult Services Librarian at Appomattox Regional Library, Sara Townsend, the Assistant Director at Suffolk Public Library, Jackie Zataweski, Director at Nottoway County Public Library, Katie Gilmer, Administrative Assistant at Russell County Library, and Jenna Shillingburg, Youth Services Coordinator at York County. And I thank them all for their generosity and time sharing and experience. We have a variety of topics today, and I think there'll be a little bit of something for everyone. And this is indeed the place where our bandwidth cut out. And so the very first couple of sentences of Catherine's presentation is cut out, but nothing so bad that you won't be able to understand what she's presenting, and from there moving forward. So thanks again for tuning in, and with that, I will send you to the original recording. Thanks.
This conference will now be recorded.
And third, articulate them the importance of developing generational representative boards. I hope to pass that information along to you in a much shorter time. So if we could go to the next slide. And slide.
Sorry, it seems to be a delay with me clicking the button in for it to actually go. So sorry about that.
Okay. So why do we need younger friends and trustees? There were sort of three main points. The first one being that representation matters. We hear this a lot with diverse books and diverse stories, but it matters in who makes up your board and who makes your decisions. And they pointed out that there were two aspects that you wanted to look at. The first being your community. What's the age breakdown of your community? There's census data from 10 years ago, and in a year or so, there'll be new data. And so that's worth taking a look at to see if there's a population you're missing. The second that they pointed out was staff. This one I find really personal. When I started at Appomattox Regional Library 3 years ago, I was the only professional staff member under the age of 40, and I was significantly under the age of 40. And in the last 3 years, that's changed. And now there's 3 or 4 professional staff in their late 20s and early 30s, but that's only going to keep growing. The second point was that there is strength in generational diversity. This was a quote from one of the presenters that I really liked. I think it sums it up. Everyone has their own strengths, and by banding together, we're stronger. And third, your longtime members are tired. You guys know this, that your board members who have served a couple of terms or served and gone and come back, your friends members who have maybe sort of been every position on the board for years, they are tired and they're getting burned out. And I think that we don't apply the word burnout to older generations very often, but it is true and it does affect them. So if we go to the next slide. So they had talked about identifying existing barriers and then developing strategies. And really the way that you need to go about doing that is to be willing to change and to be willing to listen. For being willing to change, there were a couple of things they wanted you to consider. So consider your recruitment. How do you do it? Where do you do it? Who are you looking for and who are you reaching out? Part of their research was they ran a survey of board and Friends of the Library members, and they found that most members joined because of word of mouth, that was still the most common way people got recruited. And they also found out that a lot of new members commented that they were unaware of the Friends or the board of the library until they joined, which meant that they didn't know that the opportunity was available to them. And as soon as they did, they were willing to get involved. So this really leads into your communication styles. How are you communicating both to your membership and to the public at large? Again, look at your how, your where, your what, and your why. different generations communicate differently. And so you might want to look at, are you communicating mostly via email, phone calls, text, newsletters, social media, or mostly in meetings? Another thing that they mentioned having you look at was to compare your levels of membership. So this mostly applies to your friends, not your board of trustees. What sort of levels do you have, and what's the cost associated with them? They recommended maybe adding new categories for young families or working professionals. And these could either be subgroups that had different meetings or different activities, or they could just be a level of membership with a different price point. It depends on what's available to you and how diverse your membership is. And then finally, for being willing to change, they talked about meetings. I don't know how many of you out there, your Friends of the Library, your Board of Trustee meetings are a little bit of a running joke, but I think it's very common for us to dread long meetings. So look at your meetings. When are they? Where are they? How do you meet? Why? And how long are they? Are you meeting on the evenings or on the weekends? And I think it's important to take an honest look and say, are your meetings keeping people from getting involved? Are they too frequent? Are they not frequent enough? It's something to look into. So then for the point of being willing to listen, so this would be for listening to both your prospective members and your current members. In the survey that the original presenters ran, they found that people wanted to be recruited for roles, not just because they filled a token place. So they didn't want to be the young person on the board. They wanted to be the treasurer or the secretary, or they wanted to be recruited to lead the spring book sale. And then that helps make people feel like they're important and involved, and gives them a voice. Something else they suggested was for you to share bios of your board members or maybe your members at large. And you could do this to just your membership, or you could do it to the public. They mentioned that they should include what the board members are interested in, what they like, maybe what they read. And that would be a good way for members to connect to each other and feel like they understand each other. You're more likely to listen to someone you know or have a connection with. And so little things like this that can foster a connection are helpful. And the third thing that they mentioned was to consider member assessments. You might want to think of these as peer-to-peer evaluations, which maybe you do at work, but they're an opportunity for board members to present feedback and to feel like they're connected and to sort of have a two-way conversation, and that they should be done regularly. And something that's not on the slide that goes into both be willing to change and willing to listen is that they mentioned that policies and procedures for the membership should be reviewed on a regular basis. This is good for new members so that they learn the steps behind the actions, but it's also good for the ability to change and keep adapting. And that way older members are reminded of things as well. So if we can go to the next slide. So they had a couple of big suggestions. The one was to look at the places that you're reaching out for recruitment, and they said this in the meeting, and it was so simple, it hit me like a ton of bricks, but that popular programs like Storytime are a great place to look for members. That's right there, you have a lot of young, involved families, and that would be a great place to look for people who want to get involved. I thought that was such a simple idea, but so great. They mentioned young professional groups in your community, church groups, social spots, and then they said that board members should ABC, which was not something I'm familiar with because I was not a business major, but it means always be closing. So sort of board members and members at large should always be selling the group. They should always be inviting people to join them at this meeting or come to this event. They should always be talking it up to the people they know. That goes back to the fact that most people were recruited by word of mouth. And if you're always inviting people to come, then when you have an opening, you won't have a gap. You'll have people who are interested. Another thing they suggested was that you have a recruitment party and that it has to be fun. So don't make it part of your usual spring meeting, but have a separate event where it's just relaxed and casual. And they suggested some fun activities, like maybe having a book and beer pairing. And the third final thing that they really emphasized, and that I think as a millennial I really agree with, is that millennials are people just like other board members. In the survey that they did, the number one reason why millennials got involved in a Friends of the Library group or a board was that they wanted to get involved with their community and make a difference. And that was the same reason that all other members from other generations had joined. So if we can go to the last slide. These are 2 books for recommendations. The first one is Sticking Points by Hayden Shaw. This was a book that the group used to do their research, and it's about how to get 4 generations communicating and working together. So that might be really helpful for your friends or even just your office. And the second one is All Ages Welcome. And this is actually the book that the presenters are writing or have written about this research that they did. So if you have further questions or more information that you want to know, I would recommend it. It's coming out by ALA. It's either coming out next month or in the next couple of months. And it's called All Ages Welcome by Lisa Bertinelli, Madeline Jarvis, Catherine Kaczynski, and Tess Wilson. Does anyone have any questions?
Feel free to type those in chat. And while you're typing, I have a question for you. Catherine, I wonder, did they talk at all about, with that member assessment part, not only assessing them in the ways that you mentioned, but also for like what skills they already have?
Yeah, so they did talk about how it was a great opportunity to sort of get people in the right fit. I think sometimes when we're recruiting and we have an opening, somebody steps in and fills that role, but maybe they're not able to do what they're interested in or what they have a special skill in. And so it is a good way to get to know what's available in your group beyond just what they've already done.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I guess if they have some expertise in a certain area, you know, that might even be fodder for somebody to come do a program or, you know, capitalize on their personal knowledge.
Yeah, a great way for libraries to sort of get involved and you know, I think the hard part about this session was I was lucky my friends asked me to attend. But friends and boards of trustees are a little bit set aside from the library. So you can come and get all these great ideas and you can present them to them and then hope they take them. And that's a tough place to be. So it would be a good way to show that that's how the library can get involved as well. Like the library wants to know more about the board and the library wants to know more about the friends.
Yeah, that's great. Definitely a two-way street there. So I don't see any questions in chat. So failing that, and you know, if you do think of something as we go along that you would like to ask of Catherine, go ahead and put that in chat too. We can certainly be flexible in that way. So, all right, let's go. Next up, we have Sara Townsend from Suffolk Public Library, and I will unmute her in just 2 seconds. Okay, Sara, trying to see, it does say that you're unmuted. Can
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yep, sure can.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm Sara Townsend, Assistant Director of the Suffolk Public Library, and I'm excited to share with you some of my experience at PLA, which is one of my favorite conferences. I always find that what's discussed there to be timely, and this year was really no exception. So pre-coronavirus, what many of us were talking about was diversity and inclusion in our libraries, and that was definitely a major theme at PLA. So every morning, the conference started with sort of a mini keynote called Big Idea Sessions, and my first morning at the conference started with Dr. Bettina Love, who's an author and educator, an awesome speaker. And she talked about how to build more equitable libraries and classrooms, but what really stood out to me was a call to action. So I would guess most of us have sat through diversity and equity training. I think a lot of us have sort of a rudimentary understanding of privilege and systemic racism. But in our field that still lacks a lot of diversity, how many of us are actually doing something about that? And she said we need to put our privilege and our bodies on the line and stop just being allies. We need to be co-conspirators and actually do something to address the racism, bigotry, and inequity in our communities and yes, our libraries. And she said, spend your privilege for someone else. You didn't earn it, so spend it for someone else's freedom. And that was quite the way to start a conference for me. And she really set the tone for me. And I saw threads of that call to action throughout the entire conference. So many sessions in some way were about shifting power dynamics in libraries. And my big takeaway was the idea that libraries are being called to do social justice work. And in that way, we are perhaps not the neutral entities that we like to say we are. So next slide, if you don't mind. A session that really reinforced this for me was at if you can go back one. Yeah, there we go. Pima County Public Library in Arizona, and their session, Intentional Inclusion, Disrupting Middle-Class Bias in the Library Programming, was a really awesome look at how one library system is doing the hard work of challenging their own bias and working to serve their community. So Pima County's main thesis was that middle-class values actually create bias in libraries and it impacts our customers. And I'm going to try and give you a good rundown of what they mean by middle-class bias, but this was their content and they're the experts. So definitely look into the slides on the PLA website if you want to know more. So there are hidden rules of class. Basically, depending on what social class you were raised in, wealthy class, middle class, poverty class was sort of how it was divided up for this. You have different rules on how to navigate the world. And generally, libraries are middle-class institutions, meaning we value things like success defined by achievement or making informed choices about your future. And it even boils down to how we communicate and this idea that there's a right way to communicate, including how loud someone talks or the vocabulary that they use and other things. So Pima County pointed out that the problem with all of that is that we're operating under an assumption that there's a right and wrong way to do things. And they asserted that libraries are not neutral places because of that. So we say that everyone is welcome, but they're not. They're only welcome if they follow these rules or fit in with the middle class values we live by. And that sort of threw me for a loop. It was a lens I had not really considered for my work for libraries. So they've been working to challenge themselves. And they shared 3 programs where this has been instrumental, and I'm just going to run through them really quickly. But they all 3 are awesome, robust initiatives that you should look more into. And the first is the restorative practice work. If you haven't heard of this, definitely do a deeper dive. Pima County is one of the libraries leading the charge in this area. So it's really, their focus is on teens when they're doing this kind of work. And the idea is rather than a straightforward code of conduct with banning procedures, they take a different approach. So if there's a behavioral issue, rather than just taking a kid out, they take time to build a relationship, help the teen understand impact, and give them a chance to repair the harm. So for example, a teen loses their cool and shouts at a staff member. They're not just kicking the kid out. They're going to have a conversation and find out why, maybe a cool down period. They're going to give them an opportunity to apologize to come back into the library. They also have a teen board where teens sort of appeal their banning period to other groups of teens. And it's way more robust than that. Look into it more. But the idea is it's an approach that challenges the assumption that bad behavior is something that must be punished. And they've had a ton of success. Reduced library suspensions, and it's helped to break down the us versus them mentality. And then just real quickly through the other 2, on the streets is an area where they've been challenging their bias about people that are experiencing homelessness. So they started an advisory board for customers and a monthly meal. And this was probably my favorite part because the librarian who led this was really open about the bias that they came into with and how they've changed. Let's see. So he came into it with a lot of assumptions, and by sitting back and listening, he really learned a lot. For example, he learned there's no knowledge gap. So we assume that if people just know the right places to go, the right resources, they can change their lives. And he found out that people already know all the resources in the community. It's a lot more complicated than that. There were differing values. So for example, that we really value, the library really values the future, that we're always working towards the future, but that some people, the values in the present and survival in that moment. And he also was really challenged by the idea of what a successful program looks like. So he said that their programs were really loud sometimes. There was a lot of cursing, sometimes a lot of arguing, and his instinct was try to shut that all down. But what he learned was that was actually how people were communicating and building relationships. So just by sitting back and getting to know people and letting them sort of shape what that program was, he was able to build stronger connections and build services that were more meaningful to the people participating. And then lastly, their inmate reference services. So, excuse me, many of us receive letters from people that are in prisons or jails with reference questions. Some of us answer them, some of us don't. And they were in the same boat. They started seeing a big increase, and their instinct was to say, well, we can't handle this, let's just stop answering them. But then they started questioning that impulse, because it was maybe based on an assumption that the questions they were getting were of less value, maybe because of the people that were sending them, or maybe it was the kinds of questions or the language in the letters. And so they had to really stop and think about why they had that impulse. I mean, after all, if you saw a huge influx of reference questions from stay-at-home moms, would you be thinking of shutting it down? And so ultimately, they of course, didn't shut it down and made it more robust. And I didn't write down final numbers, but have developed a really fantastic service, a much needed service for people that are incarcerated. So all of that is how really just showing how one library system was checking themselves and just opening themselves up to the people they were coming in contact with, eliminating those value judgments. And it really lit a fire under me. And if you can go to the next slide. Just some quick sort of what next tips. So at Suffolk Public Library, we started implementing some restorative practices for teens last year and have had a lot of success. And I'd say that's a great place to start. Start by looking at your code of conduct procedure. Is the focus on punishment, or is there room for relationship building there? Why are the rules there in the first place? What values are you putting forward as the right way? And is that a barrier to the people that you're serving? Also, think about what opportunities you have to amplify voices that might not be heard. If you're creating programming for a certain demographic, does that community have a voice at the table? And what would make them feel authentically represented? And finally, my biggest takeaway is that we need to be better about challenging the charity mentality we often have in libraries. This idea that somehow we're the saviors and have all the answers to help poor, unfortunate souls in our community. All that does is just create a power dynamic and a divide that others people. So I'm challenged to find ways to build understanding and to value others' perspectives and really break down those barriers. So thank you for listening to all of that. It was hard to condense that into 10 minutes. I'll leave you with a picture of me line dancing with my son at PLA. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Sara, sorry, your audio cut out about right there when you were explaining the picture. Would you say that again?
Oh, that's me and my son line dancing at PLA, mostly because I couldn't think of another image to put on this page. But I am happy to answer questions if anyone has any.
Awesome. Great. Well, so there's your invitation, folks. Go ahead and write your questions in chat if you have them. And while that's happening, I do have a question for you, Sara. When she was talking about the inmate reference services, what did they talk about what kind of reference questions they were asking? Were they primarily legal, or were they other kinds of things as well?
All sorts of things. They have, as part of continuing this system or this program, they, of course, wrote some parameters. They limit people to 3 questions per letter. There are, of course, things they can't answer, like give legal advice, medical advice, all of that. And I guess as their reputation has grown, word is out and people sort of know what they can and can't ask. But they said they get sort of the same as you would get in the library, just random stuff like questions about tattoo ideas or information for when they get out, or job search help for when they get out, or just really anything you would be asked in the library also in these letters.
That's fantastic. And what a great support people could be, libraries people could be for the population, the citizens who are returning to the community. So that's pretty cool. There is a question that wonders how that prison connection began. Did she talk about that?
Well, I mean, I don't know if everyone's library gets these letters. We do periodically, and I think that was the same for them, that their prison libraries are very limited in what they can offer and severely underfunded. So there aren't a ton of resources for people while they're incarcerated. So they're often told to write public libraries, and so a lot of us just get these letters. I don't think anyone is marketing it, though I think Pima County is now. So it was something that had been going on for a long time, and then for some reason it just really jumped. I guess word got out, and so they had to evaluate if they were going to continue or not. And I think that's how this all came about.
Yeah, I know at the libraries that I've worked in, we would periodically get legal questions or questions for legal citations and things like that. Not so much advice. And the challenge began. They wanted copies of all this legislation, and so we really struggled with. We had limits on how much we would copy for a person to mail, just from a financial standpoint, and we sort of had to think about, well, are we going to make that apply to inmates who may not have any funds to pay? Are we going to still make these copies and send them? Or are we going to put a limit on it? So that really speaks to that, evaluating your rules. The rules you might have for somebody who's out and employed, maybe shouldn't be the same for an inmate who doesn't have any other kind of access. So that's a really great point.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say if you're interested.
Okay, well, I don't see any other chat. All right. Well, Sara, thank you so much. And I am going to move things along. The next person we'll be hearing from is Jackie Zataweski. She's the director at Nottoway County Public Library. And I'm going to unmute her. And if your mic is unmuted, let's see, I'm going to mute.
I think we're okay now. Well, now I've lost your presentation. Ah, there we go.
Okay, I think we're all set now. Sorry. So just to let everybody know, I've had to move this onto a mobile device, and so that I'm struggling with the lag time between pressing a button. So then I press them several times, and then it goes and does 3 different things. So my apologies there. So with that, Jackie, please go ahead. Thanks so much.
Okay. Well, as Nan said, I'm in Nottoway County, which, if you're unfamiliar with that, it's about an hour southwest of Richmond. The county has a population of about 16,000 people, so very rural, and also more diverse than I was used to in Pittsburgh. Where we are now, I just looked at the census data from 2010, and it was 54% Caucasian and 46% racially diverse, mostly African American. So, equity and diversity and inclusion are important to me, and it's something I've been working on, but I always feel like there's more I could be doing. So that is why I chose this session. Or it's one of the reasons. The other is that the woman who presented it was my last boss, and she was nervous and asked me to be there as moral support for her. So as it says at the bottom there, Peggy's first point was just to remind people that racism and discrimination are still alive and well. She, in her talk, referenced Grace Lynn's Windows and Mirrors TED Talk, and she explained in it that Miss Lynn described how she had been told as a child that she couldn't be the character of Dorothy in a school play because Dorothy wasn't Chinese. Now, that was some years ago, but Peggy told us how she had experienced the same thing more recently. The library where she works has murals with famous characters from literature, and members of the community can be portrayed as those characters, if they're willing to pay. And Peggy had wanted to be Scarlett O'Hara, but the artist told her that no, she just couldn't do that. She should be Olan from the Good Earth instead. She talked about a couple of other experiences too, like returning from a trip to China and her board president saying that he thought it was nice that she had been able to go home. Now, she's been here close to 30 years or a little more than that, so this is home. And the people she would see in China agree with that. She said that they refer to someone like her as a ghost. But to get back to her point, racism still exists, and we need to combat it by teaching children from an early age that not everyone's the same, and that that's a good thing. To do this, we need to keep equity, diversity, and inclusion in the forefronts of our minds when we do collection development and when we're planning programs and activities, so that our collections are windows that allow people to see people that are different from them. And we want them to be mirrors also, so that they can see themselves as characters or on the jackets of books as the authors and illustrators. So if you go to the next slide, please. As far as collection development goes, Peggy given us a list of titles, and it's going to be uploading them over the weekend. So you'll be able to look at those, or there's always the We Need Diverse Books website that has a page devoted to helping you find all kinds of books. And they have their featuring different types of diverse books, and they have a whole list of links to book awards also. I have to admit that that's one of my favorite places for adding books to my wish list. Anyhow, on the slide here, you can see a few books that were included in Peggy's book. Now, a couple of them we do have, and one I've added to my wish list for when, Amazon is shipping books again. But I chose these books because they were ones that she had activities to go with them. But really, the term activities, I don't know that that's quite accurate. For the book Just Ask, her activity was a piece of paper that asked people to draw or write something they're good at and something that they need help with. And actually, I think you can see those on the next slide. The Just Ask activity there is the top right. And one for Say Something was similar to that. Kids were asked to draw or write something that they wish more people knew about them. One activity that I did like that she talked about was the puzzle that's on the bottom left there. Those puzzle pieces are about 3 or 3.5 inches across, and the children were given a piece and asked to draw their family, and then all the pieces were put together to make the community. So I really liked that idea, but what kind of bothers me about it, when I was looking on Amazon for them, like the ones you see there in the far left, all of the pieces are the same. And it just seems to me like if you're trying to promote diversity and it's okay to be different, giving everyone the exact same thing to work with, which just doesn't sound right. So if it had been my presentation, or if Peggy had asked for my input, I would have included some other books too, shown on the next slide. There we go. You can see there's a couple versions of Goldilocks and Three Bears, the top right and the bottom left. And then the other three books there are multicultural versions of Cinderella. I would include something like that because the stories are familiar to children, but it's not the standard Disney type of thing. So I would have done the same kind of thing with activities also on that other slide. The versions of ice cream from around the world. So when I looked at Peggy's book list, book Saffron ice cream caught my eye, and it just got me thinking about, well, that's something that's familiar probably to everyone, or something like that is. But I wonder what it looked like for other people and other cultures. The one on the right, there's mochi ice cream, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I hope. That's popular in Japan, I believe. The kulfi is an Indian version. That's in the center there. And then on the left was my favorite. It's called spaghetti ice. It's German, and what looks like noodles there is actually ice cream that's been put through a pasta maker. And the tomato sauce, if you want to call it that, is strawberry. And then the Parmesan cheese is coconut.
Huh.
So I thought that was a really cool idea, and I want to try it, but I guess we'll need to wait for warmer weather. So you could do something like that for an activity, just showing a commonality with the ice cream, but then showing different versions. Or you could do something like that with musical instruments too. So there were some things I found just looking quickly the other day, instruments from Puerto Rico, Africa, Peru, all different things you could actually make with recycled materials. So that was another idea. The last takeaway that we were supposed to get from the presentation was ways that we can partner with local schools to promote EDI. And this part of the presentation seemed a little lacking to me also. I do remember Peggy mentioning once that she had classes from one of the local schools come when they had an author speak. It was Zachariah O'Hara. And that would be a nice idea for a larger library, but that wouldn't necessarily work here. We could turn that around though, and if we were able to bring in an author, either live or even Skyping or something, just make sure that anything promoting it mentions that it's from the public library. But when I talked to the school librarian trying to get some ideas of ways that we could partner, the talk of ice cream led us to the idea of a multicultural night. Again, like the author, we don't have space here, but that's something we could do in her school. children getting a passport when they come in, and each room would be set up to represent like a different culture or different country. Then you'd have different activities for each of those, and the children would get the passport stamped as before they move on to the next area. So we actually got kind of excited talking about that, and then we realized that we're going to have to wait until fall at least before carrying that out. Yeah, it was kind of bothersome because we were talking and we were getting all these ideas and things we want to try, and then, oh yeah, we can't do that anytime soon. One thing we do plan to continue when we come back is visiting the schools and taking books to them. We do this not as much as I'd like here. We do visit Head Start and take them books and do a story time with them every week. I'd like to expand on that, visit the other pre-K classes, and kindergarten, first grade, and whatever classes would want us there with. That's an activity that we can do, and to promote the diversity and inclusion, I make a point that when we take those books, that they include diverse titles and diverse authors. But that leaves me with one other way that we can partner with the school and promote diversity and inclusion. We actually share our books with them. They don't have a great book budget. I believe it's something like $4 per child. And we don't see a lot of kids coming to the library here on their own, unfortunately. So what I've been doing for the past year and a half is I check books out to the school, and then the school librarian checks them out to the children. So she gets, she has the advantage of having the diverse books there that she doesn't need to, pay for, and we get to see our books circulate. So that makes, both of us happy.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jackie. If you guys have some questions, please enter them in chat. And, I was just reflecting on what you were saying, Jackie, about programming. And, it would really be just as simple as reading all three of those iterations of the Three Bears story and getting the kids to compare and contrast them about how cultures are the same and also how they're different, but that they all enjoy the same kind of story. I just thought that was really neat.
Yes.
And yeah, the spaghetti is just awesome. I will tell the listeners that I had to email Jackie and say, is this right, or is this a typo? What is this? And was just tickled to learn that it was ice cream. It's amazing. So.
Yeah, I heard or read that you can use a ricer to get that effect also if you don't have a pasta machine.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, I don't see any questions in chat, so I'm going to go ahead and, with great thanks, Jackie, mute you. And we are going to next go to Katie Gilmer. And we'll give it a minute to catch up with my phone here. Okay, Katie, can you speak? Okay, we still can't hear you, so let me figure that out. Okay, let's see what's happening here. Okay, let's see.
Oh, wait, is it working now?
It sure is. It sure is.
Okay,
Again,
great.
there's just that gap on the line, I think.
Okay.
All right, take it away, Katie.
All right. I'm Katie Gilmer. I'm the administrative assistant at Russell County Public Library. And this was my first PLA, and I really enjoyed it, although it was completely by chance that I got to go in the first place. The person who was supposed to go, something came up, so it was me, and I did really enjoy it. And the session I was going to talk about was enhancing the patron experience through visual merchandising. It was presented by Ann Hubera and Erica Cherup, whose names I'm sure I have butchered, of Columbus Metropolitan Library. And the one thing that really stood out to me was it only takes 7 seconds once they walk in the door for a person to form an opinion about a space. So only 7 seconds after entering the library, they already know what they think of it. Is it neat? Is it an inviting space? Is it somewhere that they'd want to spend time? And that's important because 76% of consumers prefer to spend time, or spend money rather, on experiences rather than material items. And I think that's really easy to understand now, unfortunately, where we have the shops and restaurants closed down. You know, your favorite restaurant, you might be able to order delivery or takeout from them, but it's not the same as going in and eating there. You also want the experience of being in the restaurant. That's part of what you like about it. And that's why visual merchandising is so important. Next slide. So visual merchandising focuses on all environmental elements that impact the customer experience inside and outside an establishment. This includes displays, signs, product placement, and layout of space. These were the 6 main elements of visual merchandising that they talked about, and it's really helpful to have kind of a visual aid. First, there's color. 90% of people's snap judgments are based on color, so that's really important. You can either do what this shop has done, they've grouped things by color, or you could create patterns, like you could arrange things in a rainbow pattern, maybe. Rule of 3, studies show that people remember things better in 3s. Odd numbers especially work, but for some reason we really like 3. So you can see this display is kind of in 3 different sections. Cross-merchandising is when you recommend something, you know, if you like this, maybe you'll also like this. And that helps people discover new things that maybe they weren't expecting to get. People remember when you surprise them. Placement is, you can see in the picture, it's like where they put the kids' cereals and kids' snacks at kids' eye level, where people who you're trying to reach are you put, okay, let me try this. You put things where the people who you want to reach will see them. Simplicity, you want to give people enough choices, but too many choices can be overwhelming. And you don't want all the materials to kind of just become one big blob. So you want there to be space in between them, enough so the eye has time to rest. And finally, balance can make a display look attractive, polished, and have a soothing effect. And balance can be either symmetrical or asymmetrical, and I think there are some examples of both in the picture. And if we'll go to the next slide, you can see some examples of how they did this in their library. First, you've got color and rule of 3, even though those are actually 4 shelves, but they're referring to the number of books on each shelf. And they've got them grouped by color. And then you can see balance and simplicity. You've got kind of an asymmetrical balance going on there. And then placement and cross-marketing, you have kids' narrative nonfiction books for African American history next to biographies, also for kids. And they were saying your display should be patron-centered, intentional, engaging, and communicate library values. Some things to consider: you want to keep the displays looking neat. You want to replenish them when people check out the book, straighten things that maybe have gotten messed up, and pull things forward so people can see them. Because they said people will assume that the leftover books, so to speak, aren't as good as the other ones. You know, that people have already picked over it and gotten all the good stuff, and this is what's left. And also on that note, they said they had thought they might have trouble with people liking the display so much, thinking they were so pretty that they just couldn't possibly remove anything from them and mess them up. Well, they didn't have that problem. People were more than willing to pick up books and materials from the displays. Condition of the book is also important because not all books are appropriate for display. They may not look very appealing, and you want to have appealing books out. They said they especially do not use paperbacks because they tend to open on their own. They refer to them as ghost books. And then, as we heard in last presentation, windows, mirrors, and sliding doors. You want to make sure you have a diverse range of books on display, and that people can read books about people like themselves and also about others. Next slide. Oops. There we go. Implementation and maintenance. They held a branding workshop for all of their staff, not just the people who were going to be working on this. There was a presentation, and then they had some hands-on training. And you want to assemble a visual merchandising team with clear roles. So people will know what they're supposed to be doing and what their job is in maintaining the displays. And to the left, you can see their visual merchandising guidelines that they had written up for their library so that people know what to expect and how the display should be maintained, as well as keeping a list of display ideas for future events and things you might want to promote. So that's about it. Is there any questions?
Well, folks might be typing their question into the chat box. Keenan commented that these are the elements that they talk about a lot in graphic design too, and that is absolutely true. I have a little bit of an art and design background. Yeah.
Yes, that was my major. So
yeah,
that's kind of why I was interested in this.
Yeah. And so it's always interesting to me to go into a library and, see what people have done in displays. And, are you keeping your areas uncluttered and simple and yet providing some choice and some visual interest? So it will be interesting for people to go back into their libraries after a bit of absence and look at it with a fresh eye. So cool.
They'd also said that they had gone to local businesses, local stores, and asked them how they did their displays, which unfortunately you can't really do right now, but
yeah,
hopefully we'll be able to again someday.
Yes, fingers crossed. Well, there are no questions in chat, so Katie, I just want to thank you so much for being with us. I'm going to go ahead and mute you now, and we are going to turn things over to Miss Jenna Shillingburg. If I can figure out which Jenna you are. There are a couple of you. Okay, Jenna, there you are. Can you, yes.
Can everybody hear me?
Sure can. Okay.
Awesome. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Jenna Shillingburg. I'm head of the Youth Services Department at York County Public Library. I had the pleasure of attending the Environmental Literacy for Children and Families session at PLA this year, and it was presented by Jeannie Andrews and Brandy Horseman, who are both from the Baltimore County Public Library. Next slide, please. So environmental literacy is important today. It's more important today than it has been in the past. Children are losing their connection to nature, and parents are generally scared to let their children explore the world around them. Aside from the prevalence of helicopter parenting, children are loaded down with school, homework, and an abundance of extracurricular activities. This often limits family opportunity and to attune with nature. Next slide, please. So Jeannie Andrews and Brandy Horseman compiled a very vast list of environmental advocates that included everybody from David Attenborough to the late and great Steve Irwin. They put together a comprehensive list of resources that included books and documentaries. All of that I've given to Nan so that she can attach to this webinar. But the one environmentalist that they really spoke a lot about was Richard Louv. They recommended his book Last Child in the Woods as like the one book that they would recommend that everybody read if they can't read every book on their recommended list. And Richard Louv came up with this idea of a nature deficit disorder, and that describes a non-medical disorder, but explains the prevalence of humans distancing themselves from nature and its variety of effects on people. So, so again, if you're going to read one book from the list that was recommended by the two librarians, it's going to be The Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv. Next slide, please. So what causes this nature deficit disorder? Including the overloaded schedules and risk-averse parenting that we previously discussed, our green spaces are disappearing. So here in Yorktown and the Hampton Roads area, copses of trees are being turned into retail complexes, fracking, coal mining, drilling, logging. These have all been destroying our parks or natural spaces. On top of this, we have the sheer technological saturation of the world. And that's just reduced the overall enchantment that we have had with the world around us and our desire to explore it. So I'll be the first to admit that as a child, I was very much an indoor kid. My parents had to fight with me to go outside, and when I did, I took a book with me. But when there were days when I went hiking or biking, camping or fishing with my immediate or extended family, and these are the days that I remember. These not the days I stayed indoors reading and watching Scooby-Doo on Cartoon Network, but it's important that we as librarians and library staff encourage the exploration of nature. We very much need to model our own enchantment of nature so that kids will see it too. And these reasons also include medical reasons. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Staying indoors and hooked to our technological devices, phones, video games, televisions, tablets, and computers causes a variety of physical symptoms from obesity to depression, myopia and other vision issues, decreased attention spans, and a low vitamin D deficiency. We need to encourage families to curb their reliance on their devices and spend more time exploring the real world around them. As we know, children model our behavior, and yes, technology is fantastic. It has allowed us to gather here today, and many of us are working from home to keep us safe during our difficult time, but it can also be a huge time sink. We need to model positive technology boundaries, encourage outdoor discovery. And spring is the perfect time to launch these programs and to start planning programs when your libraries reopen to the public. Next slide, please. So the ladies at Baltimore County Public Library have a variety of programs and clubs. They use the nature backpacks like we do here in our state of Virginia. And they bring them actually on story times that are then turned into hikes where they investigate the natural components of what they just learned. So if they learned about seasons, they'll go out and discover on a hike the different elements of that particular season. They also have themed gardens that they work into their programming, such as a sensory garden. They did a pizza garden where all the components would be toppings or seasoned for a pizza, and then had a local pizza company come out and make pizzas using their own private garden ingredients. And then they also demonstrated the historical Three Sisters garden where corn, beans, and squash nurture one another. So they tied them into overall larger themes and larger programs. They also use a lot of bark, leaves, acorn, flowers, pine cones, and natural, I want to say natural ingredients to create nature-based crafts. And I'm going to be really embarrassed here for a second, but York County Public Library did a fairy garden program. It was amazing. We had a ton of fun, but it was really expensive because we relied heavily on purchasing plastic items. Baltimore County Public Library did a fairy garden using bark and pine cones and other natural elements, and they turned out really great. And not only that, but they did it as a winter program, and then these little fairy gardens were kept out into their garden area where they were housed in the plant beds over the winter to decorate them in what would have been a very drab area. And I thought that was very cute. They also promote nature through their partnerships and outreach, and many events feature simple but fun projects such as leaf rubbing, collages, and flower pressing. But nature programming could be as simple as moving a story time outdoors. Next slide, please. So what I decided I wanted to take away from this, at York County, we've started working with our master gardeners to create a space for a Virginia native species community garden. By planting plants that are native to our area, we'll also be encouraging local bug, bird, and animal species to frequent our garden. I've tapped my teens from their Teen After Hours program to help, and so far they've created the mosaics and murals on those cinder blocks that you see in the top picture. These cinder blocks will then be turned into planters for our milkweed. We have a fleet services department, and they donated 10 tires for us to clean, paint, and use as flower beds. This is not a picture of what we've done, but it's an inspiration of what I want to do. I also want to help, I want my teens to help me paint a wooden pallet that we acquired when one of our couches was delivered. This will then be turned into a trellis for our Virginia coral honeysuckle, which is the natural species, not the white and yellow that's an invasive. And then it's also going to be the background for our recycled rain boot planters. And all of this will be held on a patio that hasn't been utilized since the library opened, which is upwards of 15 years. It is at the end of the children's room, and I'm hoping to be able to incorporate programming for the summer by just doing something as simple as taking children out onto the patio for story time. And I hope to be able to buy a couple of small watering cans so that children can help us water our plants and feel like they're contributing. So another thing that Baltimore County Public Library does is a live butterfly release, and they purchase kits with live larvae online, and everyone in the library watches them cycle through their stages until they're fully formed butterflies. So the kit shown here is from Amazon, and it's one that I'm hoping to be able to purchase for my library when we reopen. So I know that not everyone has the budget or the space to host some of the larger programs, but everyone has access to leaves, flowers, pine cones, and walks. There's something to be said for taking our programs back to the basics with everything nature has to offer. So that's my presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
Okay, well, people take a moment to type into chat. I think these are such great ideas. I know that most communities have through the Virginia Cooperative Extension, maybe Master Gardener programs and Master Naturalist programs. So there's a great way, or 4-H programs, to reach out and partner with some of these folks that might be able to help you. There's a question that Julia has in chat. She wonders where you got the cinder blocks.
I actually reached out to a local Ace hardware store, and they were willing to donate 10, and then I purchased an additional 15. The cinder block mosaic and painting idea was actually part of a teen after hours program, and that night we busted we blew our record out of the water. We had over 25 teens show up, and we normally have a 20 teen limit for that program. It's probably more teens than York County has seen in its library at once in a very long time. We actually had them work in pairs. But it was really great that our local Ace Hardware was able and willing to donate them, and 10, and then I purchased an additional 5 because I knew that this was going to be a really, really busy, really involved program. So. And we plan to do our own maintenance. I see that somebody said who will do the maintenance of our gardens, and we plan to get our teens to help maintain the gardens, and then also have the children help water. When I get back in the office, because I am working from home, I plan to do the seed starting. It's a project very near and dear to my heart. I do not have a green thumb, but I'm hoping with the help of my green thumb library assistants that we can make this work.
That just sounds wonderful. And again, talking about the collection development piece of that, doing some displays, using the rule of 3 with and cross merchandising, all of these different programs to certainly cross pollinate, forgive the pun, each other. That's just so cool. I love it. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions coming in chat. And Jenna, I just thank you so much for being with us and sharing your experience. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this recording, as well as the book lists and documents that both Jackie and Jenna referred to, will be up on the info center. You can see the little link there. And I will send that out again in a listserv fashion as well. That is the Info Center's webpage for continuing general continuing ed, where there's a link to webinar recordings. So if you go to our Info Center, you can just put webinar recordings in the search box, and it'll come up where those documents are and where the recording can be found. So thanks again, everybody. I hope everybody is healthy and well. And as always, if the Library of Virginia can do anything for you, we are an email or a phone call away. So thanks, everybody, and we will talk to you all again soon. Stay safe.